The sound of applause made Marcus Williams flinch slightly. After 18 years in prison, loud sudden noises still triggered memories he'd rather forget. He sat in the Family Feud waiting area wearing the only suit he owned, donated by a legal aid organization that had helped him rebuild his life. "You sure you're ready for this?" his lawyer Jennifer asked softly. Marcus nodded, though his hands carried the subtle tremor of someone who had spent nearly 2 decades looking over his shoulder. This was supposed to be healing, a return to normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. The Williams family from Detroit had been selected after Jennifer submitted their application. It was part of Marcus's reintegration process, something to help him reconnect with society after being exonerated by DNA evidence. The prize money could help, but mostly it was about proving he belonged somewhere again. Steve Harvey's voice filled the studio as the cameras prepared to roll. The energy was infectious and celebratory, designed to make families feel victorious and strong. But Marcus carried the weight of knowing that victory had come at an unimaginable cost. He wore a navy blue suit that felt foreign on his body. Prison uniforms had been his clothing for so long that civilian clothes still seemed like a costume. Every moment of freedom felt borrowed, temporary, like it could be taken away again. The game began with its usual excitement. The Williams family faced the Thompson family from Ohio in what should have been a joyful competition. Steve worked his magic, drawing laughs and creating those moments of connection that made the show special. Marcus stood at the end of his family's podium. He tried to smile when the cameras focused on him, but the expression felt practiced rather than natural. Genuine joy had become something he had to remember how to feel. "Survey says," Steve announced, as the first round progressed. The Williams family was doing well, their answers lighting up the board with encouraging frequency. Jennifer kept glancing at Marcus, hoping to see some spark of the man he'd been before his arrest. The studio lights were bright and warm. For most contestants, they represented excitement and possibility. For Marcus, they reminded him of different lights, harsh fluorescents in interrogation rooms, where his life had been destroyed by lies. During a commercial break, Steve worked the audience as he always did. His natural charisma filled the studio, making strangers feel like family. He noticed Marcus immediately, standing quietly while celebration happened around him. There was something in his posture that caught Steve's attention. The way he held himself carefully, like someone who had learned to be invisible. Steve had learned to read people over decades of television, and Marcus was carrying something heavy. "You doing all right over there?" Steve asked during the break, walking toward the Williams family podium. Marcus managed a careful smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just grateful to be here," he replied, his voice carrying weight that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Jennifer stepped closer to Marcus, protectively. "He's been through a lot recently," she said, but her tone carried something that Steve immediately recognized. This wasn't just family drama, this was something that had changed a man fundamentally. The cameras came back on. Steve returned to his position, but his eyes kept drifting to Marcus throughout the next round. His family was winning, but he seemed disconnected from their success, present but somewhere else entirely. The fast money round arrived. Jennifer went first and scored 153 points. The family needed only 47 more points to win the $20,000, money that could help Marcus rebuild what had been taken from him. Marcus stepped up to the podium. His family cheered behind him, but he barely registered their encouragement. The bright lights felt intense, the studio audience vast, the pressure mounting in ways that had nothing to do with any game. "All right, Marcus," Steve said, his voice carrying its usual warmth. "You need 47 points to win $20,000 for your family. You ready?" Marcus nodded, gripping the podium with hands that had learned to stay steady under pressure. The questions began with familiar rhythm. "Name something people do when they're free." "Travel," Marcus answered automatically, though the word carried weight that others couldn't understand. Freedom was still new enough to feel precious. "Name something that takes time to heal." "Wounds." "Name something people fight for." "Justice." Name something that can't be replaced. Marcus hesitated, thinking of all the birthdays, graduations, and moments he'd missed while locked away. Time, he said quietly, his voice carrying a pain that reached every corner of the studio. Final question, Marcus. What did prison take from you? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus's face went completely pale as he stared at Steve. The carefully maintained composure he'd built over months of freedom began cracking under the pressure of truth. The studio waited, his family waited, but Marcus couldn't speak because the question had reached into the deepest part of his trauma and torn it open. Prison had taken everything, but admitting it meant reliving it all. Marcus started, then stopped. His breathing became controlled in the way of someone who had learned to manage panic in dangerous places. The bright lights suddenly felt like spotlights, the audience like judges who had already condemned him. "Everything I'll never get back," he whispered, so quietly the microphones barely picked it up. But the cameras caught everything. The way his shoulders sagged, the tears that started flowing, the way he gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes. He'd seen contestants struggle with difficult questions, seen them get emotional, seen them freeze under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. He set down his cards and walked toward Marcus. Not the measured walk of a television host, maintaining show pace, but the immediate response of a human being recognizing someone in profound pain. The studio fell silent as all protocols were abandoned. "Marcus," Steve said softly, reaching the podium, "what happened to you? Talk to me." Behind the scenes, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He looked up at Steve, tears in his eyes, and let 18 years of injustice pour out. "I spent 18 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit," he said, his voice steady despite the tears. 18 years of my life stolen because someone pointed at me in a lineup and said I was the one." The words echoed across the studio like a shockwave. Audience members gasped audibly. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were witnessing something far beyond entertainment. This was injustice made visible. "I was 23 when they arrested me," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm 41 now. I missed my father's funeral, my mother's retirement, my sister's wedding. I missed 18 Christmases, 18 birthdays, 18 years of being human." The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick responses and perfect timing, found himself in territory no game show had ever prepared him for. This wasn't television anymore. This was someone's stolen life, laid bare. "Marcus," Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance, "how did you finally get out?" The question was gentle, giving him permission to tell the story that had been trapped inside him. "DNA evidence," Marcus whispered. "Technology that didn't exist when they convicted me. 23-year-old evidence that proved I wasn't even there." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Jennifer was crying now, standing at the family podium watching the man she'd helped free finally speak the words that had been locked inside him. She had seen him struggle with freedom, with trust, with believing that justice had actually been served. Steve looked at Jennifer, then back at Marcus. In that moment, he understood something profound about the difference between being released and being free. "And how long have you been out?" he asked gently. 8 months, Marcus replied. 8 months of trying to figure out how to live in a world that moved on without me. Everything changed while I was gone. Technology, music, people. I'm a stranger in my own life. "Do you have family still?" Steve asked, cutting to the heart of his isolation. Marcus looked toward Jennifer, then back at Steve, wrestling with emotions he couldn't fully express. "Some," he said honestly. "But 18 years changes people. My friends moved on. My girlfriend married someone else. My parents aged 18 years while I stayed frozen in time." The loneliness in his voice was devastating to hear. "I'm 41 years old, and I've never owned a cell phone, never used social media. never bought a car. I'm like a time traveler trying to figure out how this world works. Steve Harvey had made people laugh for decades. But in this moment, he learned something about the difference between entertaining people and witnessing the cost of injustice. He did something unprecedented in television history. He walked around the podium and pulled Marcus into his arms. Not a quick, camera-friendly embrace, but the kind of hug that says your pain is witnessed, your loss is real. The kind that transfers strength from one human being to another. "Marcus," he said, still holding him, "I want you to listen to me very carefully." He pulled back to look at him directly. "You didn't just survive 18 years of hell. You kept your dignity, your humanity, your ability to trust enough to stand on this stage." The audience began to respond. Not with applause, but with sounds of recognition, of shared outrage at injustice. People were crying openly, touched by the raw honesty of what they were witnessing. This was freedom and captivity, and survival made visible. "You see," Steve continued, "some people spend their whole lives in prisons they build for themselves. Fear, hatred, bitterness. But you spent 18 years in an actual prison, and came out still capable of hope. That's not just survival, that's victory." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus just showed us what injustice looks like, what it costs, what it takes from people who did nothing wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time." His voice carried across the studio with absolute conviction. He's been carrying this alone, trying to rebuild a life that was stolen from him, trying to catch up to a world that moved on without him. The audience erupted, not in the programmed applause of a television taping, but in genuine recognition of courage they had just witnessed. This was resilience and injustice, and the long road to healing made real. "Marcus," Steve continued, turning back to him, "you asked what prison took from you. I can tell you what it didn't take. It didn't take your strength. It didn't take your ability to love. It didn't take your future. Prison took 18 years. But it didn't take the rest of your life. You're here now, you're free now, and that freedom means something because you know what it costs." Marcus was sobbing now, but the tears felt different. They weren't just tears of loss anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finally being heard, of having his stolen time acknowledged by people who understood its value. "But how do I get those years back?" Marcus whispered. "How do I make up for all the time I lost? All the moments I'll never have?" The question carried the weight of every wrongfully convicted person's struggle. "Marcus," Steve replied firmly, "you don't get them back, you honor them. You use the time you have left to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. You turn your pain into purpose." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Without explanation, he dialed a number while the cameras continued rolling. The conversation was brief, conducted in whispers that only Marcus could hear. When he finished, he looked back at Marcus with something approaching hope. "Marcus, I just spoke to some friends of mine, people who work with wrongfully convicted individuals. We're going to make sure you get the support you need to rebuild." The Thompson family, who had been watching this unfold from their podium, abandoned their competitive position entirely. They walked across the stage and surrounded Marcus, their opponents becoming his support system in a matter of minutes. "You know what?" Steve announced to the studio. "Both families win today. Because today we learned something more valuable than any prize money could teach us." He looked directly into the main camera. "We learned that justice delayed is justice denied, that 18 years of stolen life can't be given back, but the rest of someone's life can be lived with purpose. That freedom means more when you know what it costs." The audience rose to their feet, not in the programmed applause of a television taping, but in genuine recognition of injustice witnessed and humanity restored. Marcus stood surrounded by strangers who had become family, held up by support he hadn't known existed. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Steve removed his suit jacket, the one he wore for every taping, and gently placed it around Marcus's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me through every show," he said. "It's seen winners and losers, joy and sorrow. But today, it's going to wrap around someone who showed us what real victory looks like. Someone who survived the unthinkable and came out still capable of trust." The jacket was warm and substantial, making Marcus feel protected in a way he hadn't experienced since before his arrest. It felt like being claimed by something good, like belonging to a world that might actually want him. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something unprecedented happened. People didn't leave immediately. They approached Marcus one by one, sharing their own stories of injustice, of survival, of rebuilding after devastating loss. A woman whose husband had been wrongfully convicted. A man who had spent years fighting false accusations. A teenager whose father was still fighting his case. Each person who spoke to Marcus added another thread to a tapestry of support he hadn't known existed. Steve stayed with him through it all. This wasn't publicity or show business. This was community forming around shared recognition of injustice, proof that witnessing someone's truth creates responsibility for their healing. The episode aired 6 months later, exactly as it had been filmed. No editing to soften Marcus's pain, no removing of the hard truths he had spoken. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Legal aid organizations reported increased donations. Innocence projects saw volunteer applications surge. But most importantly, lawmakers began having conversations about compensation for the wrongfully convicted. Marcus became an advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking about the hidden costs of wrongful conviction. He appeared on Steve's talk show 8 months later, not as someone still trapped by his past, but as someone using his experience to change the system. The business card Steve had given him led to resources that helped him navigate re-entry. Job training programs, counseling that helped him process trauma, a community of ex-honorees who understood the unique challenges of freedom after injustice. Steve's jacket became a symbol Marcus shared with other ex-honorees. He wore it to his first speaking engagement, where he talked about the difference between being released and being free, between surviving and thriving. A year later, Marcus had an answer to Steve's question. Prison had taken 18 years, but it hadn't taken his ability to hope, to trust, to believe that justice could eventually prevail. It had taken time, but it hadn't taken his future. He learned that survival isn't just about enduring injustice. It's about transforming that injustice into purpose, that pain into power, that stolen time into a mission to ensure others don't suffer the same fate. Today, Marcus works with the Innocence Project, helping other wrongfully convicted individuals navigate the complex process of proving their innocence. He tells them about the day he learned that freedom is more than just being released from prison. Steve Harvey still keeps a photo from that day in his dressing room. Not a professional shot, but a candid moment of Marcus, surrounded by strangers who had become family. It reminds him that sometimes the most important television happens when injustice is made visible. The studio audience from that day formed an informal network that continues to advocate for criminal justice reform. They check on Marcus during difficult times, celebrate his victories, and prove that witnessing someone's truth creates lasting commitment to change. Marcus's story proves that wrongful conviction doesn't just steal time, it steals trust, relationships, and the basic human experience of growing and changing with the world. But it also proves that the human spirit can survive even the deepest injustice. Because Marcus Williams wasn't just a number in the system for 18 years, he was a man who refused to let injustice break his humanity, who emerged from hell still capable of hope, still believing that truth and justice could eventually triumph over lies and corruption. And sometimes, freedom begins, not when the prison doors open, but when someone finally witnesses your pain and says, "This should never have happened to you. Now let's make sure it never happens to anyone else."